Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the 6th webinar in the Clubhouse to Development webinar series. Today, we'll be discussing how to identify and engage major gifts donors. As always, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the GoToWebinar tool, and we'll review those after the presentation. First, I'll introduce you to who we are and your speaker today. Cogeo is the leading expert in the sports nonprofit industry. Our management team has 70 years of fundraising experience and has raised over $750 million for more than 200 nonprofit organizations. And one of the reasons that we're particularly passionate about working with sports and soccer clubs like yourselves is that our leadership has both played and coached soccer. And that includes your speaker today, Rob Cusell. As a college All-American and a highly successful soccer coach, Rob is now the Managing Director of Consulting Services at Cogeo and has helped hundreds of sports organizations implement strong organizational development and fundraising strategies. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Mel. Hello, everyone. So why don't we go to slide 3, and you'll see there that this is, in fact, as Mel pointed out, the 6th of 8 webinars, and the title is Engaging and Monetizing High Net Worth Donor Prospects. The next slide is very telling because you can see where Major Gifts is positioned within the house, the Clubhouse of Development. It's right in the center because it is a centerpiece of any strong fundraising effort. And it's also immediately implementable. With a 2-month preparation phase, you can have an aggressive major gift program up and running that yields significant results. And that complements the retail giving, the annual giving, as well as the events, if you're doing an event. Today, the next slide, we're going to speak mostly about high net worth individuals and really how to leverage them in that context. Corporate and foundation are clearly major gift activities, but the focus today, because we've already covered the other two, will be mostly on high net worth individuals. So what are the goals and some context for today? Understanding what a major gift is and how to evaluate its return on investment. Generally, the return on investment in a major gifts program is extremely high. Connecting how major gifts activity is fueled by the lower floors of the smart home and fuels other rooms. So that's the connection I just described between major gifts, corporate, and foundation giving. Understanding of how technology and data management practices are leveraged in a major gift program. So we'll close with talking about CRM system mostly. So next slide, number 6. What is a major gift? So the thing to understand is that there's no set amount. Major gift definition varies from club to club, agency to agency, given the size of the fundraising budget. And that's really important. And the formula that we like to use is 0.1% of the annual fundraising budget. So if the fundraising budget is $10,000, the major gift is $10, because the idea is if you can raise 1,000 of those, you've made that budget. So that's really important to understand. And if your budget's $100,000, then it's $100. So it's 0.1% of the annual fundraising budget. And generally speaking, major donor gets moved up from the first floor into the second floor, particularly if they're high net worth individuals. And we'll talk about that. So the next slide now, more practically. So what are the elements of a strong major gift program? The first thing, and we'll look at 3 case statements as we do evaluate case studies later on, but we'll actually go over 3 case statements, and there are many on our website, cogeo.us/case. So what does a case statement do? It's a deck, a prospectus, which is a corporate term, and it describes mission, history, programs, achievements, future plans, and financial needs to fund those future plans. So it's a comprehensive tool in fundraising. It can be used for programmatic and or capital, as you'll see later. You need leadership. So beyond the board of directors, the board of trustees, there has to be strong leadership, generally coming from current parents who are excited about the potential for fundraising in terms of impacting the club. The executive director, technical director also needs to be involved for sure. But really, it's getting as many people committed to a campaign steering committee on an annual basis, and they really become friends of the club and ambassadors for the club in terms of connecting to the right funding sources. And then finally, to have a strong cultivation and stewardship plan, which is once you're receiving gifts, how do you thank them properly, and how do you enhance your position in terms of their giving again the following year and thereafter. So what is a major gift? You'll need prospects. And here again, we're speaking specifically about individuals for the most part. A major gift conversation is a one-on-one meeting. It can be done by Zoom these days, or we're having our clients leverage walks now that the weather's getting better across the country. It's good to go on a walk or even have an outdoor meeting during this time until everybody's vaccinated. But it's one-on-one engagement. And you're really looking for AAA prospects. They have high affinity toward the work of the club or the academy. They have access into funding sources into the community, and they themselves might be affluent. And the first thing we do whenever we go to work with a club or an academy or a league or a governing body is we do a complete wealth analysis of their membership to understand which families have a net worth of 1 million and up. And that then gives us scientific data on the third component of a AAA prospect in terms of their potential affluence, particularly if they have a high affinity and their type A personality with high connections, therefore providing access. So who are these people? Well, we know that there's 7 types of donors, 7 types of philanthropists. There's the communitarian, the devout, church giving, and that's big. The investor, so this is a person who wants to see a serious return on investment. The socialite, for whom giving is fun and creates all sorts of activities and recognition. The altruist, somebody who gives because giving is the right thing to do and they expect nothing back. The repayer, that would be somebody who may have benefited from financial aid as a player in your club, and now they want to come back and help support other players. We see that a lot, particularly in colleges and universities. And then the dynast, think of the Ford family, the Rockefeller family. These days, it's more around technology, right? So it's Bill Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Warren Buffett. Those are dynasts. They give away millions and millions. Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, Chin, they are giving away a lot of money through their foundation, obviously. So 7 types. Here's the good news. Of those 7 types, not one gets offended if you ask for too much money, which is to say you're sitting down with them and you're asking them to consider a gift of $10,000 to your club to help financial aid. None of them will get offended. So that's good news. The other thing you should know is some of these, particularly the socialite, will tell you, or the altruist, they'll tell you, no, don't thank me, don't bother. Every one of these likes to be thanked multiple times. And that's why stewardship is really critical. The next slide, number 9. So why think about high net worth individuals as important? Well, we know this from a preceding webinar, is that individuals drive or catalyze or consist of 70%, nearly 3/4 of all fundraising dollars. Now that's a little skewed because of religion and tithing, but it's still absolutely significant. So that's why we really do focus on past members, alums, alumni, if you have good data, as well as current members. And the good news with clubs is that every May or June, depending on when you do tryouts, you're onboarding a whole new set of families. Therefore, a whole new opportunity for engagement. And those of our clients who are now committed to doing this properly, we then establish over the years a culture of giving that becomes ingrained within the culture of the club, which hadn't been there before. And again, this is both for 501c3 clubs and for-profit clubs with a foundation overseeing this component of it. And by the way, this was for the year 2017, so 4 years ago. And since then, the market has literally boomed. And so there's actually more capacity than ever in those individuals that are of importance to us, which is the wealthy in this case. We're looking for major gifts. Slide number 10. Let's look at some stats. And again, this is from 2017. And what this does is leverage three concepts. Those agencies, clubs that use methodology and a consistent process consistently, inconsistently, or nothing at all. And look at the result. If you use it inconsistently, you might as well not use it at all because you actually get a better result on the upside. But there's no doubt that by having a dedicated system, much like what we're describing here and what we've described in the past with the other webinars, using consistent practices, making sure that you've got methodology and accountability, consistency in terms of engagement, and all the right stewardship and back-end procedures, as well as really good tracking of data, that will ensure immediate and then success over time. Okay, now in the next slide, we're going to begin to speak about how do you do this? What are the best practices to ensure success in a major gift program? So the first thing we talked about earlier, which is to do the wealth screening, right? You want to identify who your qualified prospects are. Now, in the past, it would be, oh, well, you know, they drive a really fancy car and they live in a big house. They must have money. And so everything was kind of hypothetical. Or they own a business, or you know, she's a CFO of a large hospital, and a lot of it, you know, could be research, kind of, but what we do is completely scientific and some of the best software ever built around wealth screening. And so it really helps to understand scientifically what's happening within the communities of the clubs. You want to do research in terms of what they do beyond just their wealth to make sure that you really understand, you know, if there's truly those AAA characteristics, namely affinity, access, and as I mentioned earlier, affluence, which is done through screening. The next slide is a process that we call moves management. Now, this is really just implementing the process of the major gift program. And so you've done all the prep work, which is you've got a really good case statement that makes a compelling case. And again, we'll examine a few in 5 or 6 minutes. You've got a well screening done, so you have a pretty good sense of whom you're dealing with in terms of their own position in society. And you also have spoken, because they've got kids in the club or 1 or 2 kids in the club, you've spoken with the team managers as well as the coaches to get a sense of what their experience has been like, what kind of feedback loop has occurred with them, if any, and really get as much information as possible, particularly if you don't know the individual or the couple. So what are moves management, right? It's making a series of intentional moves, beginning with a meeting, and then thereafter, to ensure that they're engaged and committed, not just for 1 year, but for the future. So obtaining the meeting, and that should be done in a donor-centric way, which is meet where they want to meet on their time, given the amount of time that they have. So the first thing we always do is, Sheila, how much time do we have for this meeting or this call? That way you know how to frame it. How much time can you spend on the case statement, et cetera. So as I mentioned earlier, prepare for the meeting. Get as much data as you can holistically. You know, you've got their wealth identification, if in fact, as a household, they're worth more than $1 million, but it's the other soft stuff, right? It's their relationship with the club, the kid's relationship, if in fact you're dealing with a parent. If it's an alumni, then, you know, what was their time like when they were at the club way back? So just make sure you're well prepared. Then you need to have a meeting execution plan. The technical director, the executive director, they will need to attend because they're going to make the ask, right? Generally, board members, you don't want them making asks because then the person that they're asking could then come back and ask them for money. And that's not, they can't do that with a technical director or an executive director. However, board members can supplement, and they can, they can say, I totally support this. I myself give. This is something we really believe in. Understand roles and responsibilities. As I mentioned earlier, generally it's an administrator and a volunteer, or just the administrator. That way there's just one role. But if it's two people, and you don't want to have more people on your side that they do on their side, you don't want to go 3-on-1, for example, right? 2-on-1 is okay. No more than 2-on-1. So if in fact there are two people going, decide who's going to make the ask and who's going to play the support role. The person who says, yep, I firmly believe in this. As a matter of fact, I support it myself. And then what will happen is once you've made the ask and engaged that person, there's going to be one of 3 answers, yes, maybe, or no. And either way, they've taken the meeting. So even if it's no, there's got to be a reason. So you find out why and you work around that. And then you want to have really strong stewardship post-meeting, which is communicating and understanding, how much they want to be communicated to. If in fact they've committed to a major gift, then you'll want to have frequent stewardship in terms of how their investment is, is producing really. And what we do is we put our clients on a quarterly frequency pattern where there's a note that goes out every quarter, 3 months after the transaction, if the initial transaction was done, then another 3 months, and then we try to engage that entity into re-upping in the following year. So you can see on the right-hand side, there's a nice diagram. So it's identification, research, cultivate, meet with them and solicit, and then steward. So the next slide is really what I just described, which is ongoing stewardship moves. And the good news is, if you have strong data record keeping through a customer relationship management system, CRM can mean many things. It's an acronym, can be used in different ways, but that's what it is. And the best one in the market is actually free for a 501c3 or a foundation, and that's Salesforce.com nonprofit product, although they've just changed the name. And so we implement that for all of our new clients, and it puts them in great stead for life, really, because Salesforce is committed to this. And you'll want to have hyper-organized systems, really, just making sure that you've got good communication tools, strong document storage, which Google Cloud does that for you, or Microsoft, two good products. And then make sure that there are standing meetings and or standardized agenda in terms of in-house development so that you're tracking all this. With our clients, we meet on a weekly basis to ensure that there's all this accountability as well as good record keeping, et cetera. So the next slide, before we go into some case studies, really high net worth individuals are oftentimes high up in corporations or small business owners themselves. Therefore, there's a link to corporations through triangulation. They may know other business individuals who have affinity toward the club, right? So it's important to make an ask of financial, will you consider making a gift of $10,000 to support financial aid and scholarships at the club this year, or 500 or whatever the number is. Yeah, that's fine. You've made the ask. But the other thing you'll want to do in that meeting is really explore their network, right? We used to talk about a Rolodex. Now it's LinkedIn, right? So who in your LinkedIn network would have appreciate the same kind of meeting that you and I just had, Sheila, right? So it's not just making the ask, it's engaging them now, because they might be a strong business person in town or a strong civic leader. They may be on the board of a foundation that could support the club. They generally, now this is a little crass, but it's true, rich people hang out with rich people. That's just a fact. Therefore, if you're dealing with a high net worth individual, most likely her friends will also be wealthy for the most part. Therefore, you want to ask, hey, are there other parents in the club that either on your team or in your social network that would appreciate this kind of conversation, that would want to get involved? And then the fourth area I mentioned, civic leaders, is government, right? And that is city council, park and recreation. Yesterday, I'm in Richmond, Virginia. I was at River City Sports Complex down in Chesterfield, and it's 9 turf fields, all lit. Incredible. Now, who paid for that? Well, park and recreation, right? In line with the city of Chesterfield, knowing that it would bring a massive amount of tourism, soccer tourism, we call it, to that complex and other sports, because it's lined for lacrosse. I saw a field hockey team training there yesterday. There's one of the fields that's also lined for American football. It looks like they play cricket there as well. I saw some cricket lines on one field. So it's thoroughly it's thoroughly monetizable, which is why we look to city council, we look to Sports Economic Development Commission within cities, particularly if we're working with a city client, to ensure that they're completely in the know on what the project is, particularly if it's a complex build out, of which we're doing many right now. So these are the 4 key areas, and high net worth individuals can help triangulate into those 4 areas potentially. Some into all 4, ironically. But so the key is not just making an ask, but also understanding what their triangulation potential. Triangulation is an interesting concept, which is, okay, we know we want to get to this small business, which is an orthopedic surgeon, but we don't know that, right? But we know that this person has a strong connection to them, and we have a strong connection to that person. Right? Well, we go through that person to get to the orthopedic surgeon. That's called triangulation, and this is what I'm talking about here. Okay, next slide. Now we're going to look at a few case studies, 3 case studies from around the country. The first was several years ago. We did some work with the YSC Academy. In Google, their website, it's incredible. They've got some great video there, and you'll get a sense of the scope of the facilities and what they benefit from. Essentially, it's a grade 8 through 12 boys academy that is an independent school in suburban Philadelphia, King of Prussia. So what we've got here is a unique situation, which is 90% of the boys are on financial aid, full financial aid. And because they all live near the school in homes that were purchased by the school, we have parents living with several kids in each home. It's a lot more than the usual tuition. So the annual cost for each student is about $60,000+. So we built out their major gift program, right? And as I just described, one of the first things we did was, the first thing we did was to build a custom case statement. So Mel, let's take a look at that case statement. And you'll see a similarity among the 3 case statements, which we're going to review quickly. So the first slide is the introduction. The second is essentially what you're going to see today here in the case statement. The third is the mission. And you can see these pictures really enhance because they demonstrate the true diversity that exists in this academy. And then the love of learning, the lower right picture. The next slide is an overview of the academy with a nice picture of the head of school, Nuha, and a couple teachers on the top. So this really gives the feel that it's not just about soccer. As a matter of fact, soccer is really secondary. This is about giving kids a chance to self-actualize through soccer and academics. And then the next slide is, this demonstrates the quality of the program because look at the universities these kids are going to, those who aren't making the professional team right out of the academy. And that's happened, by the way, and you may know that. And then again, the next slide is really about diversity and showing these kids in class. And you know, a kid, Aaron Schwartz, class of 2017, we got a quote from him. It's a very powerful quote. And then the next few slides, you can just kind of rifle down right through 15. It just demonstrates, what they do and how well they do it, who benefits. And you can read this later. Again, it's on our website. And then slide 18, again, really demonstrates the academy, college counseling, career counseling. It's not just soccer. And who benefits on the next slide. And then a final point. And they talk about a strategic advantage that they have. And then again, slide 22 here, we're really emphasizing not soccer, but the self-actualization concept around conversation and research. Slide 24 provides a timeline from founding in 2015 all the way to when this case statement was written, which was in 2017, 2018. And then the opportunity on page 27, you'll see it's heavily focused on financial aid at 1.5 million. And this would be for 1 year. And then the other areas, we were looking at curriculum, faculty development, career and college counseling, and sport pedagogy speaker series. And then who's involved? So there's a list of the board of directors, as well as some of their partners, mainly the Philadelphia Union. And then the final picture is of the facility. And you can see this is just one of the fields, one of the 3 full-size fields that they have indoors there at the 2 full-size, and then a couple other spaces that they have at the academy. And then I think they have 3 outdoor fields, turfed, all lit as well. So it's quite an impressive complex right there. Right next to the Mall of the King of Prussia, if you're ever up there. Okay, back to slide number 15. So the other thing that Pennsylvania has an EITC program, which really is around corporate giving to education. It's a highly incentivized tax program. You can read about it online. So they were able to benefit from that through our advice. So we engaged board members, gave them specific roles in terms of who they need to contact and how to do it. And they committed to quotas. Each board member committed to quotas to engaging 12 to 15 individuals in year 1. Well, the net result is we raised 1.3 million, which is a lot. That's not standard, candidly, particularly since they were not in a capital campaign. If they had been in a capital campaign, that is standard. But just for financial aid, for the most part, that's remarkable. And then at the end of 2018, we did an executive search and installed Stephen, their founding director of development, who's kept on pace and is raising, I think, over 1.5 million a year, every year. He might be getting close to 2 million this year. I need to talk to him. So that's YSC's story. The next slide would go toward the middle of the country, and it's Lake Country Soccer Complex, Southwest Missouri Rush. What they have there is a current multi-field complex and an indoor center. And the Southwest Missouri Rush is a Rush club, was created last year. And the complex itself services a number of clubs in the greater Springfield area. It's one of the nation's classic complexes, but it's old. It needs complete renovation. Most of the fields need to be lit, and then the indoor center needs to be renovated as well, because it's looking a little old. I was there last year, and it definitely looked as if it could use a nice spruce up. In this case, it's not nearly as wealthy a community as, say, San Francisco, or even the access that we were provided with YSC Academy because of the founders' reach. Missouri is just, it doesn't really have the philanthropic background than some of the other areas in the country. And so here we took a different tack that I mentioned earlier. We are doing major gifts. We are doing a lot of the work that I described, but we focused heavily on, because they are the only player in town, on economic impact. And so Cogeo did an economic impact analysis on if the entire facility were turfed by the summer of 2021, what would that mean from an economic impact standpoint to the city immediately? So instead of doing a phased approach, which is what we had planned on, the idea was to try and convince the city to make enough of an investment to be able to do it all at once. So we did that, and about 6 months ago, we began a conversation with the city council and brought them to the site, had multiple conversations, and great news, in January, there was a $5 million award made, and potentially up to $10 million to take care of the indoor facility as well, which will then allow the economic impact to begin in the summer of 2021. Let's take a look at the case statement only so that they can see the similarities. So again, it's dynamic. The second page, again, table of contents, mission. On the next page, the history, which has got a really rich history, this complex. And so again, if you keep going, pictures, very soccer oriented, because this is truly all about soccer. The programs that they run on page 7, and you can see they were 4 main programs: indoor, outdoor, summer camp, and then financial assistance. They also have a pretty strong top program. And so there's a great picture on the next slide. You can see the scope of the facility. And keep going, and then we've got the need, which is let's turf the whole thing. Whole benefit, everybody in Springfield that plays soccer and beyond. They held the high school state championships there because they have one great turf field in already, and because of COVID, they had to move it away from St. Louis. So they had one great event. And then here's the economic impact on slide number 10, which we summarized into one slide, but you can think of a much more detailed document. And so 26,250 non-local visitors. So it could have a huge impact. And we know this is highly relevant. I, for example, live, as I mentioned, Richmond, Virginia, where we've got 2 major clubs, the Strikers and the Kickers. And you may have heard of the Jefferson Cup, which is hosted by the Strikers at their various complexes around Richmond. They own 3 major complexes that are incredible. And they also host ECNL finals every 3 years, I think. Henrico County, which is the county which has, it's a huge county. It's all over Richmond, and it goes all the way down south, east to the airport, all the way out west to Short Pump toward Charlottesville. It's a huge county, and many businesses are in this county. And it turns out, even with the airport authority there, the largest economic impact driver in Henrico County, because of the Strikers, Richmond Strikers and the Kickers, is soccer tourism. And I can assert that that's absolutely true, because if and when there's a tournament in town, I think there was one last weekend, Whole Foods becomes a completely different environment, full of soccer players and their parents. And you know they are, because they're in their uniforms, right? And they're between games, and you could see the money being spent live. So this is real. So if you have a complex, you really need to make the case and engage with the proper authorities. We're renovating Orlando City Seminole Complex in Florida, and in this case, we're talking to the Orlando Sports Commission because of the fact that they've got professional teams in town, and they're also looking at the 2026 World Cup being a host facility. And therefore, there might be some serious economic opportunity. And so the rest of this, you can keep sliding, really does a good job in terms of finalizing the opportunity on slide number 14. And ironically now, and then John on the next slide, great guy, he's executive director. And then the listing of the board of directors on the next slide. And then their partners in the last slide. So you can see the similarities that we had with the YSC Academy. So back to the slide 16 of the PowerPoint. So as I mentioned, the economic impact will start this summer as they're about to renovate the entire thing. Right now they're talking to vendors, making sure we have all the right vendors. Okay, one final case study. This is San Francisco Elite Academy. Again, now we're across the country. Like YSC, they were started pretty recently, it's 2014. And what happened there is an interesting story. There was a flight of all the elite players, the great players out of San Francisco down to San Jose or up to Marin County or across the Bay Bridge over to Oakland, Bay Oaks United, etc. So all the good players, great players, were leaving because there was nothing in San Francisco really of quality. So a group of key soccer leaders decided to get serious, and they knew that it was really the pay-to-play model just couldn't work in order to attract the top players in San Francisco who reside in the less wealthy boroughs of San Francisco. And so they knew that if they were going to be successful in retaining all the key players who were being recruited away, they would need a very strong financial aid program, much like YSC Academy. Not as big because they don't have the boarding, but a strong financial aid program from the onset. So it was self-funded initially by a couple of the founders, but in 2016 they hired us and they got serious and they implemented all of the things that we just talked about in an organized way. While they do have a healthy financial aid segment within their player population, it's a very wealthy city, as you know, and so there's also a very wealthy group of parents within their community. And as I mentioned, their mission is committed to access for all. Anybody who's good enough or is deserving to play at that level, and they do produce some of the top teams in Northern California, needs to be given that opportunity. So we're calling it Access for All and financial assistance to support that. We'll review the case statement at the end of this little case study. And then we performed a number of cultivation events pre-pandemic. Obviously, in post-pandemic, we're now doing it leveraging the technology. But so what is that? It's really identifying a parent who really believes in this economic access for all and having them host at their home. And then the executive director, the director of coaching, describe the current state, why we're doing what we're doing, and educating the parents who were invited and attended the cultivation event on the goals for the campaign for this access for all. And then we set up meetings, one-on-one meetings with anybody who had attended the cultivation event, which led to those one-on-one asks that I described and the triangulation, et cetera. So what were the results? In the first year, they raised $94,000. Year two, they doubled that, nearly doubled to $178,000. Again, using these methods and these processes. And then the following year, 3 years ago, that was a breakthrough year in that one group of parents, a set of parents attended one such cultivation event. And we didn't know this. They had screened fairly well, the well screening, but it turned out they had set up a family foundation whose sole focus was economic access for the disadvantaged, and 2 kids in the club. And so they heard our pitch at the cultivation event. They requested a meeting, at which time we found out that they had this massive foundation. And then from there, they told us, make an aggressive ask. So we asked for 125 over 5 years, per year for 5 years. So we asked for $625,000, and they committed to $500,000, which it was a transformational pledge because that represented half of their annual financial aid budget, which is $200,000 a year. So this was truly transformational in that it allowed them to divert money to other areas, so which created better teams, better coaching, and just a better environment, better access. So this was all done leveraging the same tactics we talked about earlier, which is a strong steering committee, committed volunteers, having people host cultivation events, making sure the case statement is really strong. Let's take a look at that. So again, page 1, we focused on their logo. They thought that really represented, they didn't want to stand out a player, 5 players. Again, it's all about access. Page 2, you've seen this, right? This is table of contents. Page 3, equity, girls, boys. And page 4, here's a message from the chairman, and then happy parents. I'm sorry, Mel, that was page 6. On page 8, because we've got 2 pages per page here. Again, overview. This is on our website if you want to read this in detail. On the next page, Again, San Jose Earthquake president giving a testimonial. That has impact because it shows that they've got reach and clout. College pathway, page 10 and 11, quickness, speed, and agility. The next 2 pages demonstrate their palmarès, right? Here's the success we've had already, even though we're a startup. NPL League One champ, U.S. Soccer Development Academy finally, etc. So, and then the importance of financial aid on the right side, right on page 13. And so here it's explaining to the potential donor, why are we doing this? Here's the history, and here's whom it benefits. And then supporting parents, the Rigettis. Next 2 pages, again, 14 and 15, really just emphasize who's benefiting, how does it work, and a final point. Then they work on discussing all the assets that they have, coaching staff. Eddie Soto, he's a USF coach, University of San Francisco, very well known in the Bay Area, San Francisco. And then you've got some alums as well. Page 20, 21, Troy Dyack. You've probably heard of him. He was on the national team at one point, certainly a star player for the Earthquakes a little bit back. And then John Doyle, who's a big name in the San Francisco Bay Area as well. He's an older generation player, but he was a tremendous defender and very well known. He heads up the Mustang Soccer Club. You may have heard of them because they win national championships. They're out of the East Bay, but that's John's club. And then the statement of need, right, around facilities, financial aid. So again, it's a little less than $200,000 per year with 5 years, 944, 5 total. And then again, same as the others, coaching, equipment, and technology. So notice it's not much on facilities. It's really about access because San Francisco actually has a lot of turf fields. They passed a bond issue and they did a private funding campaign several years ago. And then again, close out with their leadership to demonstrate, Poe Bronson, for example, on page 24, he's very well known, Stanford University author. So having Poe on the board really. And then spokespeople on the right, you recognize these names. Again, Dyack, Doyle, Dave Romney, very well known because he went to University of San Francisco. And then the steering committee, Brad Rothenberg, is David Singer. These are high net worth individuals that, David Singer is extremely well known in the world of technology in that area. So again, we're really stressing that, and then their partners on the final 2 pages, really stressing the breadth of the involvement that they've gathered over the years. So that's SFEA, San Francisco Elite Academy. We're currently working with San Francisco Youth Soccer, as well as San Francisco United Football Club. That's a for-profit for which we've set up a foundation. And over in the East Bay, near Oakland, we're working with Walnut Creek Surf, and then Ballistic United out of Pleasanton. And it's a combination of financial aid, facility, coaching development. And so it's really everything for those clubs. And there's several others as well. Okay, let's go back to the webinar and conclude it. A couple more slides. Slide number 18 is a great way to close because this is about data management, right? Because if you're doing this well in an organized way, you're going to have a lot of data. And that's a good thing. The other thing is, if the club is committed to this, it's not for 1 year, as I mentioned. It's really in perpetuity. So you want to leave a strong legacy to whomever might succeed you. So I talked about Salesforce.com. It's great news. They've got a free product, up to 8 licenses for the 501c3 sector. And as I mentioned, if the clubs that we work with, and so far none of them have had any kind of CRM, this is something we actually do for them as part of our work. This way you can track and steward, because they've got all these auto mechanisms within Salesforce that trigger those quarterly stewardship moves that I talked about earlier when we talked about moves management. It allows you to properly segment lists. Let's say you want a list of anyone with a net worth over 2 million. Anyone who's given over $500. Let's say you're in year 3 now, and you want to segment with anyone who's given $250 last year or more. So it's really segmenting lists can happen. And as I mentioned, you want to make sure you leave a strong legacy around fundraising and donor management. And so you want to make it succession friendly. And then wealth screening, as I mentioned, is a huge plus. We have a strong partnership with a company out of San Francisco called Windfall. And we've built an API, application protocol interface, to Salesforce. So when we dump the data, here's how it works. We work with a client, they provide us with whatever data they have. It could be their current membership, could be their current membership and past membership, could be current membership, corporate partners, alumni. So it's really custom. And then we load it up into Salesforce, and then it automatically works the API into Windfall and auto-populates in about 48 hours. So it's magical, really. It's incredible. So that really, those combination of, Windfall and Salesforce is really an asset as you're doing this work, both in terms of preparation and then stewardship. All right, penultimate slide, 19. So what are the key takeaways? There's no doubt that major gifts will be the most significant contributor to any effective fundraising short and long-term plan. And as I mentioned, it can begin immediately. 2-month preparation phase, you're off and running. And it can also occur whether or not you're in a capital campaign around programs, as we've demonstrated. Prospects are always generated from current donors or friends. You don't want to do cold calling. Current donors or people that will become current donors in many instances, they'll lead you to other potential donors through triangulation and proper stewardship. And then, as I mentioned, through data management and then accountability, implement a hyper-organized process and strategy. So when we work with our clients, as I mentioned, we have a standing weekly meeting, which is heavily agenda-driven, which ensures that things are happening and that there's accountability on both ends. And that's really important. Now, before I hand it back to Mel, I'll close with this. This is really important because we're the industry leader, and we know what's happening out there in terms of who's adopting, who's taking this on. And the market is just being made. You would be an early adopter if you decided to get into this and be serious about it. And that's really important to understand. Clearly there's some who decided to get into this 4 years ago, like YSC Academy, who are now raising millions. Others just got into it and are already seeing the results, the benefits, true benefits. So San Francisco United set up their foundation at the beginning of the end of last year. And already we've had several appeals, many meetings, and they've raised tens of thousands of dollars that never would have happened unless they had done this. And so that's really important for you to understand. You would be out of the gate early if you and your team decided to consider doing this. And the last piece of advice I'll give you is, unless you've got somebody who has done this kind of work in a very serious fashion, professionally, not a volunteer, but somebody in-house, you need guidance, external guidance. Okay, that's really important to know. Well, thank you. Mel, back to you to close.
Great, thanks, Rob. And for everybody joining us today, we will be sure to send a recording of the webinar through our Georgia Soccer webinar platform. On the platform, you can also find things like resources like we've mentioned within this webinar, as well as an easy way to get a hold of Cogeo. So if you want to have conversations with us about how to implement these tactics, we're happy to do that, and you can get a hold of us through there. So thanks everybody for joining in. Thank you, Rob, for presenting.